always say when a kid wants to date, this is the best time to find someone like me because that's when they also care about social skills and they also kind of care about like presentation and reminding to put on deodorant and stuff like that. So like use where they are as a motivation. Like just because they're 14 doesn't mean that they should be necessarily doing all the social skills. At 16, they might be like, "Ooh, I want to date." That's when they might really lean in on everything.
Welcome back to Mother's Guide Through Autism podcast. I'm Bridget Shipman, your host, and today we're going to be speaking with Dr. Allie Perkinson. And Dr. Allie is a licensed educational psychologist. She's speech language pathologist, board certified behavior analyst, and neurodiverse couples counselor. Dr. Allie refers to herself as an interpersonal detective who searches for patterns to increase connection, either in romantic relationships, friendship, or parent-child dynamics. So, if you're interested in improving your relationship with your autistic child or learning about the dating intricacies of autistic individuals, this episode is for you. So stay here with us. Welcome, Dr. Allie.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, we were talking just a bit before I hit the record button, and I'm very interested in this topic. I get this question a lot, not so much from the folks who are neurodivergent, but from the parents, and they're interested in all this. But before we get into that, can you tell us a little bit more about you, yourself, and what
Yeah.
you do and how you help people?
Yeah, I always like chuckle to myself when someone reads my bio. It's really obvious that I very much like school, so I kept just going to school forever. But no, I mean, I started my career working with autistic children, I guess 15 years ago at this point, and doing behavioral therapy. And with that, I really fell in love with the social component, so that pragmatic language, the speech. And throughout doing that, I kept being drawn more to like teenagers and adolescents, and they would just ask me really obvious questions, right? Like, how do you know if you're flirting? What does kissing feel like? Just like questions that it's like, yeah, I guess no one's saying this to you. And obviously you're curious. So that kind of led me to really be more interested in the like dating relationship component within autism. And so now my practice really focuses on that. I have a private practice that looks a lot at couples, so neurodiverse couples where one or both have autism, ADHD, some form of neurodiversity, or parent dynamics. Like, so I just had a parent, their daughter just got diagnosed with autism. She's 22. Unfortunately, she had a plethora of other wrong diagnoses before this, right? And so the parents just met with me to be like, she's having meltdowns and she wants our help, but we're not actually helping. We're like aggravating her more. So like talking through that. But also just I felt like in that conversation, the parents just needed a little bit of understanding of like, how's autism manifesting at this age? Because so much is still about kids, right? And they skipped all of that. Their daughter had autism the whole time. They just didn't know. So I do a lot of parent coaching. And then the last thing is just individual coaching. So I work with a lot of people who are maybe finding their manager frustrating, or they're not sure how to talk to their professor, that they need like extension on tests. So that kind of really specific language stuff that, if you have autism, you already have a hard time initiating. That's initiating and asking for help, right? Those are such like core components. So working on that and working through that social anxiety part.
Yeah, that's so important. I'm so glad that we're having this conversation because you're right. Yes, there's more information out there, but there's very little for the adult. You get into tweens on up, right?
Right.
And it is so difficult. I know Joseph, he struggled with that too, which anybody, I think, that is an ASD diagnosed, or really just anybody neurodivergent, there's those social aspects that are so tricky for our kids. I'm really interested if you would tell us about the therapy practice that focuses on the social communication
Yeah.
or the neurodiverse individual?
So I think it's honestly so how I kind of bring in all of my different backgrounds. I mean, one guiding principle I use a lot is something called acceptance commitment therapy. So
Mm,
ACT, and it really looks at your values and also kind of just overcoming challenges, right? Like life is challenging. So accepting that part and being able to work through some of the things. So like, if you really want to be employed, we got to get through the interview, even though interviews totally stink and I can totally empathize. Like we have to prepare type of thing. And then the overarching is kind of like I really look at pragmatic language for what it is, right? Because so often most of the people I work with are really, really smart, like far more educated and smarter than I am, but they're missing that core like, oh, right. If I say hi to the person, they're going to say hi back, and I'm allowed to ask them for something, and they can ask me for things, right? Like that kind of like basic conversation folly back and forth. Like, so I really get into that pragmatic language. And typically, I see like the biggest challenge is that perspective taking. I think rigidity tends to really be a challenge in language. And if you can't take someone else's perspective, it's really hard to engage in conversation.
Yeah, it is. I think it's really difficult when your timing is off too, right? I see that a lot. Like I can see you want to say something in a conversation and you finally know what you want to say and you're trying to keep up, but then you don't know when to say it.
I hear that so much from clients,
Yeah.
right? And like most of them do have a little language processing, auditory processing at play. And honestly, I feel bad. My solution for that isn't the best, right? Because it's either like you blurt it out or you try to like, I teach a lot about like you can bring it back around, like remember when you said I was thinking, but it's just that off part. And I hear that from clients all that's actually one of their biggest, I would say, barriers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of social anxiety comes up because of that, right? I'm so glad that there's help out there for folks because it is a real struggle and it's
Yeah.
very, very difficult to teach somebody how to do that.
It's like tactful. Some of the stuff that I bring in is like business coaching, dating coaching, but like for neurotypical, like what is actually out there about how to like break down like a manager conversation. Cause some of that research is pretty good of how to like set things up and how to end conversations. So I bring that in because you're right. It's not easy to teach. There isn't that much communication research because most of us just sort of fumble through and do it. So we haven't really like researched particularly like, okay, how does this work or why does this happen?
Yeah, it is. It's so interesting and so happy you're doing this. And I think another area that we already kind of touched on is to the parent-child relationship and the family relationship with autism and like what their common problems are and how to maybe structure some information for our listeners on that.
Yeah, I think a really big one is I hear from a lot of parents like it is really hard when you do have a very intellectually smart child. And then there's they used to call them splinter skills. I don't even know what the word is anymore, but like sort of holes, for lack of a better word, right? It's like you're doing amazing in geometry, but then you're not texting your friends or like you won't join the Discord group. And that can feel so challenging for parents. I think one big thing is for you and your partner and as a family to even figure out like, okay, what do I want friendships to look like? Because neurotypical, neurodiverse kids, they don't really hang out like we did, right? Like they're not going in these like big play things after school. Like it's just not the same. So, one, checking what expectations you really have. And then two, I think checking in with your child about like what friendships they want. Because like I have this teenager now, I work with the whole family. I think he's 16, but he has a Discord group about Magic the Gathering, this like card game he really likes. And that he's really happy about that. And then he plays Magic the Gathering once a week and he goes to fencing twice a week. And honestly, he said it so well to his parents. He was like, I don't want any more friends. I don't even want more people. Like I'm already peopling enough, Like, so I think really figuring out, okay, what does my kid even want? And what do we want? Like, do we want 10 activities a week trying to make someone social? And then the other thing is I love social skills groups. I ran social skills groups. I'm not dissing them at all. However, I think it is worth listening to your child when they're like, this doesn't feel like a good fit, or like this is too low for me or too high for me, or like I feel sometimes we think we have to push through and make them do the group. And then I think another big one is just understanding like what to talk about, so like really following the special interest. Like I personally could care less about Minecraft, Roblox, Dungeons and Dragons, but I know a decent amount now because that's how I connect with a lot of my clients.
Mhm.
And they'll like call me out, right? They'll be like, you don't know what that is? And I'm like, no, I don't. And I could tell they're like kind of judging me. So I make a point to then learn about the topics. So yeah, I think those would be one of the two areas I would really think about as a parent.
Yeah. And it's very difficult to let go of what the expectation is as a parent and what you think your child should be doing or should not be doing, and actually what really serves them.
Well, and in the parent's defense, I do still think most case managers, doctors are pushing a lot of times, like involve them, sort of make them do them. So I can understand how a lot of parents are confused as to like what's the right avenue. Um,
Right.
like I work with one family, both parents were really athletic. Their child just isn't. He's just clumsy and quirky and so adorable, but not athletic. And
Yeah.
that was really hard for them though, right? Because I think they thought my kid is going to play sports, my kid's going to thrive on a team. And totally, teams are great. If you can get your kid on a team, that's amazing. But really checking in on like, would this even be helpful? Like, if he's going to be really bad at the sport, is this team even fun for him?
Right. So I guess it's just about really listening to your child and then really figuring out how much is too much. I think what we want for our kids aren't necessarily the best thing for them. So, but I also think that there is some level where we do need to try to get them out a bit
Yes,
if we want them
because
to function in the world, right?
totally, because there is all these kids right now that are having that sort of post-COVID syndrome where they were able to be
Yes.
sedentary and are struggling so much. Right. So I
Yeah.
agree with you. There's definitely a balance of not wanting to be in the home too much and also not making their world too small, right? If they're just seeing their nuclear family, that can
Right.
be really comfortable and then they're not expanding out.
Yeah. I'm sure parents listening are going, oh my gosh, but which? So we're going to break it down for
Okay.
them a bit.
Okay.
Would you give us 3 practical tips to improve the parent-child relationship?
Yes. I think, again, the first is learn their special interest and know that they may info dump on you, right? And all that means is really talk about the topic ad nauseum. But I don't know where these came from, but I think it's really worth it for parents to realize what these are. Neurodiverse love languages. Have you heard this before?
I've heard, but it's
Yeah.
new to me, so I would love to learn, please. Yeah.
So learning about them, I think, is so helpful. So one of them is info dumping, right? Like, I trust you enough to tell you all about my special interests. Another one, I'm probably not going to remember all of them, but is parallel play. So that really is mom and dad are maybe watching TV, and I'm sitting with my video game, my coloring book near you, but we're not engaging. We're just near each other. That for a child can feel really nice. Like I get to be with my parents but we're not having a conversation about the football game. The other one is called, I think it's called pebbling. And so it's like when your child hands you a rock or a leaf or something and you're like, thank you, or they send you a meme, it's actually them really like sincerely saying, I thought about you. This reminded me of you. So really honoring most of my adult autistic relationships, they communicate via memes because it's just easier than having to get their own words out, right? So like or they'll, find like an old Magic the Gathering card and give it to their partner. And that's like, I really love you. I sought this out. So reminding yourselves of those love languages, because at times, yeah, they can feel maybe even odd or confusing and like, what are we doing here? But that is your kid expressing love. I think the second biggest thing as a parent is to remember that you're a co-regulator, which is so hard, right? Like I get it. You're being told to do a million things. You're worried about your kid's future. I mean, talk about anxiety provoking. However, your kid is aware of you and they're aware of your nervous system. So if you can be as calm and regulated as humanly possible. Like I'm talking a little
Yeah.
fast because I just had coffee. Not the best example, right? Like if you really
Yeah.
get down to their level, like literally be, at their level, trying to talk slower. The other thing, the last one I would say is by and large, none of my neurodiverse kids like being asked a lot of questions. They
Yeah.
ask a lot of questions, right? They love the why. Tell me more, tell me more. But for them, I've just felt like it feels like attack, like they really can't take it. So reminding yourself, okay, if I ask them how school was and they answered, great. We're going to then put on music or something, right? So
Right.
you don't want to reward conversation with more conversation. So it's not
Right.
actually rewarding your child. That's going to feel invasive.
Yes, it is so hard. Like
Yeah.
everything that you just described and suggested, I can personally relate to with my son.
Yeah.
And, I wish I would have known that earlier.
Well, you're even told the opposite, right? Like I do remember
Yeah.
being an early speech therapist being like, "Oh my God, ask them things, point everything out." It is good for language development. I just don't think I let parents know like you could do that 40% of the time. You don't have to do it 100, like
Mhm.
I don't know if parents have always gotten the best direction about that.
Right. And also if my son Joseph said, I don't know, that means, oh, I'm still processing and he literally doesn't know. So it's not like keeping something from me, which I had to figure that out too.
That's so true. Yeah, that's a big one. Big, and I think as the kid gets older, right? I understand everyone has a no phase when they're young, but most kids when they're older, if they're like, "Do you want to do this?" and they say no, their no is pretty true. Like there's really not too much wiggle room, unfortunately, right? So I always
Mhm.
say to parents, like, be careful what you ask, because if you asked, then you got to honor what they're like, you opened it up, you know what I mean? And
Right.
then it's nice to honor what your kid's actually responding to.
Yeah, I think that is great advice and information. The challenges that autistic adults face in the real world and how to help them thrive. As a parent, what do you suggest? How can we support and help?
Find other neurodivergent people for sure. That's what I would say is the biggest difference that I see with my older adults, finding people who get them. Right. So
Mhm.
again, this is that special interest. Okay, so your kid likes D&D. D&D is kind of cool now, but it used to like be like so nerdy, right? So if your kid really likes it, let them do it because other neurodivergent kids are probably doing it, right? So like lean into anything like that they really like. I think, let's see, as an adult to be supportive, I think when you're thinking about jobs, being real, like what can my kid handle? Has my kid ever been able to get up for school on time? No. Maybe we want to really look at remote jobs or hybrid jobs, like really, how do I meet them where they are? Again, following that interest. Most of the adult men that I work with are, I'm being a little stereotypical, but engineers or work at an airport or, like really went with what they liked as children, but a lot of them have hybrid jobs.
Yeah.
And I think that makes a massive difference. I think the other big thing is don't invalidate, right? So like I just had a young adult was saying she was talking to her mom and she was just kind of saying how tired she is. And I totally get it as a parent. I'd be like, okay, like buckle up a little bit. Like you're 22, you can do this. But I honestly do think most neurodivergent people are a little bit more tired. Like I do think their sensory system can wreak a little bit more havoc on them. So just being, more like, I know doing the whole life schedule can be so challenging. I get it. I get tired too. And
Yeah, I,
yeah,
I think having some empathy for their feelings or what they're saying, and then really supporting them, but also encouraging at the same time. That's that tricky,
yeah,
tricky spot we've been talking about, right?
yeah.
Great. Yeah, that's great advice. And really, those tips are very helpful. And again, I wish I would have known that years ago, but here we are.
Well, and in, everyone who has an older child's defense, this just, remember, I feel like it all came about in COVID, kind of. People find like
Right.
autistic people were like, hey, I liked this. I didn't like this. Listen, it's still pretty new.
Mhm. Yeah, that is very true. And so we're gonna like grow right into the dating.
Okay.
Let's talk about that. So your doctorate focused on what dating intricacies of autistic folks, right? Like
Yeah.
that's really interesting to me. So what are the that word's hard to say,
Intricacy, yes.
intricacies?
Time, I'll tell you my doctorate. One, I want to say I went in like, oh, I'm so smart. I'm a speech therapist. I'm totally gonna know what they think. And honestly, communication was pretty low on the totem pole of what they cared about. The biggest one was boundaries. None of the people I worked with use that word. They more use like responsibility, but how do I manage a relationship and all my interests? How do I manage a relationship and going to school? They had real concern over someone overtaking their time and how much time, which I was like, okay, I totally get that. I just didn't realize it was but that came up as the highest. And then the second was just confusion over, well, what are the timelines, right? So like I meet a girl and then I meet her parents and then I kiss her, or like, how does this work? Like what do I actually do to ask people out? Do I go on they had all heard that you have 3 dates and then you have sex, and I was like, okay, wait, it's different so like, but all that stuff's out there and they're
It's
hearing
true.
it, right? And
Mhm.
so that was really confusing. And then kind of, they were saying like, what do I talk about in a date? That was probably the third concern. So UCLA peers, so they're, a whole social skills group, but they have that dating curriculum that's based a lot about like, how can we break down what's a date, what are worded, like what's words, what's flirting, what's hooking up, what, because there's all different words now for different things, like now kids don't even really ask each other out, like now you're just together, like it's all different. And peers does a really good job of updating that kind of stuff, so they have some definitions. They go over questions you can ask. If anyone's seen Love on the Spectrum, the peers group had a lot of, they talked about that a lot in there.
Yeah, that's great information. So if I were somebody new to this and my child is in that age frame, or you're looking yourself for help as an autistic person, would they just like Google
Yeah.
UCLA
Yeah,
peer,
you see, yeah,
UCLA peers? Okay.
peers dating, and there's like
Peers dating.
there's a boot camp, there's classes, there's a book, there's all different things. And then there's people like me, right, who might do some individual coaching with you or talk about how to do online dating and how to be safe. There's all sorts of different like other ways to approach it.
Yeah. What's your best advice for autistic individuals who want to be in a romantic relationship?
So one thing is like check yourself on what a romantic relationship is. So I think a lot of what I do with people is just teaching, like I think most of them want to be in the romantic relationship they see on TV, and they're not aware of like the steps or responsibility and commitment that comes with it, right? So really defining like, what does that mean? Because a lot of times when I work with people, they maybe want to kiss someone, but really what they're saying is they want like friendship. They want like a closer friendship, right? So looking at, do you actually have common interests with these people? And then also, this is mostly for the guys I work with, but they tend to be attracted, which is totally fair, to like model type women. But I think it's because that's what society is like saying that you're supposed to date, right? Because that's like, the pretty girl in the movie or whatever. So helping them also understand like that there's a variety of women and that you want to look for different things other than just someone's looks, and never invalidating. Like, look, we all pick our partners based on how they look. I don't want to take that away from someone, but helping them realize the sort of spectrum that people can look. And then another thing I talk to a lot of people about, like, do you want someone who's also autistic? Do you want someone that has anxiety? Because these are things that could be really helpful for you
Mhm.
two to have in common, right? So looking at that as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. I'm really taking this all in because I know that everything you're talking about is spot on just from my own personal experience. So it's such great information. Tell us about the improv method and how it can help therapeutically.
Yeah, so a really good friend, Maya Watkins, she created a lot of these improv games, and then I'm just lucky enough to be able to use them. But I really like using improv in my sessions because it builds flexibility. It's fun. Most of the time when I bring it up, everyone tells me that they already hate it because they've probably gone to improv before and they're like, I hate this. But they are willing to do it. And when I say a game, I'm talking maybe 45 seconds to a minute of improv. And I might do that like 3 times in a session. So it's pretty short, but it's just a way to get them thinking on their feet and be more flexible. So one of the games is called like gift giving. And I would give you a gift. I would say, I'm going to give you my dog, right? And they have to say thank you and what they're going to do with it. Most of my clients are going to say, you can't give me your dog, or I'm allergic to dogs, or I don't want your dog, but they
Mhm.
have to say thank you and what they're going to do with it, right? So it just builds that like perspective, flexibility. Thank you for giving me a gift. Like it just gives those little skills.
Yeah, and I can see how practicing that, just surprise conversations
Yeah.
would be
Yeah.
like, I love that. And I think that's great for anybody.
Yeah.
What is your best advice? What advice for moms raising kids on the spectrum would you like to give?
I think it's really finding other parents who get your kid, right? Because I do think spectrum's so big. And I
Mhm.
also know there's so much nastiness out there with like influencers and sometimes parents. And like, I mean, I truly always feel people are just doing the best they can and trying to get the information they can. I don't think they have negative intent, but I think really finding people who are similar to your child, because I just don't, the advice doesn't work if someone's limited verbal and someone is quirky. It's just not, the differences, it just doesn't add up. So that, and I think it's good to also be around neurotypical children sometimes and to remind yourself of like what typical milestones look like, because most 4-year-olds are having tantrums and not listening and screaming no, right? So like just to have her, and I know it can obviously be worse when you add in neurodiversity, but just that reminder of you're not doing everything wrong. Like some of this is just developmental. So I think that's really important. And then the last thing is trust your gut on therapists, because I've had so many parents be like, yeah, I didn't like her, but our pediatrician said that she's good. And, but like, if you don't feel like they get their kid, or they're not really listening to what you're saying, you don't have to stay. There's tons of us. So you don't have to stay with one just because, like definitely look around and trust your kid. Even if your kid is limitedly verbal, their body cues are going to tell you, right? And it doesn't mean that therapist is bad. It just means your kid isn't clicking with the therapist, and that's okay.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is great, great, great advice. Sometimes the kids are just going to be upset and have a meltdown, and you didn't do anything wrong at
No,
all.
no.
It's just part of the development. I think that was such great advice, and all of it is great advice. So thank you for that.
Of
Is
course.
there anything else you want to mention before we go?
Think so. No, again, I think it's just finding providers you really like, listening to podcasts you really like, and just kind of know it is a journey that ebbs and flows, right? So I've had some families for like 10 years now where they kind of pop in and out with me, and like their kid really is different every time and has some beautiful strengths, but then has receded in some areas, not because anyone did anything wrong, but just to remember like that's going to be normal. And, I always say when a kid wants to date, this is the best time to find someone like me because that's when they also care about social skills and they also kind of care about like presentation and reminding to put on deodorant and stuff like that. So, like, use where they are as a motivation. Like, just because they're 14 doesn't mean that they should be necessarily doing all the social skills. At 16, they might be like, ooh, I want to date. That's when they might really lean in on everything.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. That's so true. And so, with that said, where can folks find you?
Yeah. So my website is Connection Squared, and there's a little dash in between Connection and Squared. And then on Instagram, I'm connecting with Allie, and Allie is ALI. Yeah.
Okay. And in case you're driving and listening to this, don't worry about it. We will post all that information that was just shared. You'll be able to find Dr. Alley. So we'll make sure that everyone finds out about you. Thank you so much for this great information and for being a guest on our podcast.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
If you enjoyed this episode of Mother's Guide Through Autism podcast, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and help Joseph and I spread knowledge, hope, and inspiration. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next episode.